We have Ricky Blacker, WordPress, the Hosting Survival Guide. Ricky is a self-taught web professional who has found and fell in love with WordPress and the community behind it while he was looking for a CMS platform to build websites for clients. He originally started his own web design business after being made redundant from a factory job in 2013, but now works for WP Engine as a pre-sales engineer, providing digital experience platform for WordPress users around the world. He's a co-organizer for the Sunshine Coast and Brisbane WordPress meetups, as well as the Brisbane Web Design Meetup Group, and was one of the amazing team who put together the Sunshine Coast WordCamp in 2016 and WordCamp Brisbane in 2017, 2018 and 2019, and has spoken at WordCamps in Australia, New Zealand and in Singapore. Ricky's very passionate about building the WordPress community and helping others to learn how to use WordPress and what it can do. Ricky is known to a lot of us here, so give him a big, warm welcome. Ricky, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we all today? There's a lot of enthusiasm in the room. Pre-lunch, I know, everybody's hanging out there. How good was the morning tea and the scones and the brownies? I believe they're just normal brownies. Hopefully, otherwise it might get a bit freaky. Who's enjoying WordCamp? This is amazing. I think the most amazing thing is I keep all my lanyards, and this has now got pride of place. This is now my absolute favourite lanyard ever, and it's just, you know, a lot of love's gone into that, obviously. So yeah, let's get it started. Thank you very much for everybody for being in and listening to my talk. Hope you'll learn a little bit from it. A little bit about me. Will's just done an awesome job of wrapping up who I am and what I do, but I'll just quickly go because I've already done the slides, so I better do the slides. That's me. I don't know why I put the picture because you can see me here anyway, but that's me in my normal after-party attire for WordCamps. Fortunately, I haven't brought that outfit tonight, so you're spared that. I live in Brisbane. Anybody here from Brisbane? Yeah, there's a few of us here. We come all the way down. As Will said, I used to be a web designer, developer, whatever, you know, it's one of them loose terms. I made WordPress websites, basically. Until I was lured over to the dark side by WP Engine and got into the hosting space, which is completely different to what I was used to, but I love the job. It's an amazing job. So let's get started. Let's find out a little bit about hosting. So this is what a web host looks like. This is state-of-the-art technology that we have nowadays. So basically, if you've got a website, you need a web host. There's really no other way to do it. You have to host your website somewhere, whether it's on a laptop in the back room of your house or with a very expensive hosting company. Either way, you have to host it somewhere. You might notice that for those who come along to WordCamps a lot, that primarily a lot of the sponsors are web hosts. And that's because everybody here is a target audience for web hosts. Everybody who has a website needs a web host. You need somewhere to put your website. So what is it all about? Let's go back to the beginning. When I first started, I was creating websites with static HTML, CSS. Anybody done that? Who can remember those days? How simple was that? Oh, so simple. You didn't have to worry about it. You just have to really quickly, well, you know, it used to take me a couple of weeks to make a menu, but it was good fun, you know. And then you'd whack it up on a web host. It didn't matter what web host. It was static information. It could be the worst web host in the world. It still pretty much ran pretty good. And that's all you had to worry about. Didn't even have to worry about getting hacked as much because there wasn't much to hack on a static site. So it was really, really simple, really easy. And the websites were amazing. This would have cost millions of dollars back in the day. My God, look how amazing that is. But then things changed. So, you know, the world evolved, the web world evolved greatly with dynamic content, CMSs. I mean, I've got another talk where I talk about how I found WordPress and I looked at all the different CMSs. It opened up a completely new world to me. I didn't have to learn all that deep coding stuff. I could make things happen very quickly and easily with WordPress. but it also brings in a whole new layer of complexity to your web hosting. So you've got a lot more to worry about now. It's not static, it's not as easy as it used to be. There's a lot of complexity, there's security issues, there's dynamic content, there's updates, different plugins, all sorts of things. And this is what we deal with from a web designer or web developer or just a website owner level. We have all this stuff, but how does that affect with our hosting? And I've got to admit, back in the day when I was learning how to web develop and building WordPress sites, I really didn't pay a lot of attention to how that worked with hosting. That's what I paid the hosting company for. That was their job to deal with all that. But it is very important to learn about this stuff and find out how it does affect your hosting and how you can better use hosting to make better sites. So what do we need from hosting today? Let's go in and kind of delve into what hosting is. So a lot of people think of hosting as that, a big black box that you chuck all your website on and that's it. And that's primarily what it is. And a lot of times you'll see the ads, you buy your hosting and it'll show you a picture like that. In reality, what you're getting is this. You really rarely get an entire piece of hardware to yourself, unless you're paying a lot of money. It's actually a virtual system. So it's a big lump of hardware which is cut up into little chunks, and people share all those chunks. So you've probably heard the term shared hosting. So what's shared hosting? What's that mean? Well, if we go back to this picture, each one of these little chunks is a VPS. Shared hosting is one of those chunks which you're sharing with a lot of other people. So it's a shared, you've got sharing all the server, now you're sharing a chunk of that server. So has anybody gone to a backpackers? Yeah. So what happens in a backpackers? Do you get your own room? No, you share a room. Do you get your own toilet? Nope. Do you get, first class service? No. So that's what shared hosting is. It serves its purpose. When you're backpacking across Europe or Australia, and you're on a budget, you're a young student, you haven't got much money, you want to go backpacking, you're not going to go and stay at the Hilton every night. You're going to go for something cheap, and all you need is a bed to sleep in. That's what shared hosting is. It's very cheap hosting when it's not important that you have all the bells and whistles. If you just need somewhere to put your hosting, that's where shared hosting works. But you are sharing the resources. That's why it's called shared. So then you might see on other websites saying dedicated hosting. So what's dedicated hosting? Well, that's your luxury hotel. That's where you get a room to yourself, you get your own bathroom. Basically, when we go back to this picture here, you're getting one of these chunks to yourself. A virtual part of the server, you're getting all the resources. So you're not sharing anything. You are sort of sharing the entire server still, but you're getting an entire chunk to yourself. And that's very important to know about, because this is what, depending on what kind of website you have, is what you need as far as these two solutions. And then, of course, you've got cloud hosting. Does everybody know what cloud hosting is? We've got lots of clouds out there today. Some of the hosting's up there. I don't know if it's... So cloud hosting is basically the same thing, except with cloud hosting, it's a network of computers independent of each other, but connected. And it's very hard to kind of visualize, because you're thinking, well, does that mean it's just everywhere? Basically, the easiest way to explain it is you'll have your website on a computer somewhere. But with cloud hosting, it has the ability to replicate itself anywhere in the world. So if a server goes down, there's the entire, let's say an entire, so you imagine an entire building that's got all this hardware in it. There is the opportunity to reboot it somewhere else and have your website back up and running without any interruption. That's the basics of cloud hosting. It just means that it's not reliant on one particular piece of hardware. It can kind of replicate itself around the world. So let's get into server uptime. Has anybody seen server uptime? 99.9% or 99 or 999999. What does that actually mean? So with uptime, if you're looking for uptime, you want to get at least 3 nines. So 99.9 at least. if you can. And you want to monitor it too. A lot of these hosting companies, they will give you, okay, we'll give you 99.9999% uptime. But you have to monitor it. They're not going to monitor it. They're not going to tell you, oh, by the way, we were down for like 2 hours last week. Here's some money back. You've got to monitor it. So make sure you've got something like Pingdom or Uptime Robot and have that so you can see when your site goes down. And then you can contact them and say, hey, my site went down for 2 hours. Can you explain why and can I get some rebate? So in those uptimes, they'll actually have a clause that says if it goes down, we will give you a percentage of your hosting back. So obviously if it goes down for 5 minutes, probably not worth much, but if it does go down for a day or two, you can actually be entitled to some money back. But what does it actually mean, 99.99%? Let's have a look. At 99.9%, this is what you get. You're allowed to have 1 minute, 26 seconds, 26.4 seconds a day, and up to 8 hours, 45 minutes and 57 seconds a year. So that means at 99.9%, if your server went, let's say it went down for 8 hours over the year, that's allowable. And that could be spread out over the year on one day, but within a year, that's what you're going to get. So what's the difference between that, say, and 99.95? So now we've got up to 4 hours for the year. Still not a lot, 43 seconds in a day or 4 hours over a year. So that's a 4 hour difference for an extra 0.05%. Then if we go to 99.99, we're looking at 8.6 or 52 minutes over a year. Still not a lot, is it? But it can make a difference to your business. A lot of times I'll ask people, what happens if your site goes down for 5 minutes? Now, depending on that answer is what kind of hosting somebody needs. So if I said to you, what happens if your site goes down for 5 minutes, and you say, don't really care, doesn't really matter much. And say, okay, what happens if it goes down for an hour? Oh, doesn't really matter, it's probably, won't worry me, a day, I don't care. So that kind of person, if you've got a site like that, you don't need to spend a lot on hosting. And this kind of thing's not going to worry you. On the other hand, if I said to you, what happens if your site goes down for 5 minutes, and you say that's catastrophic, I could lose $10,000 in sales, then this kind of thing does matter. But bear in mind too, when somebody says an SLA of 99.99%, that doesn't mean they're guaranteeing it's going to be up. That just means that they're going to, on average, they'll try to make it up, have it up at that rate. But if something goes down, they'll compensate you. So it's a compensation. The compensation, like I said, is only going to be a percentage of your hosting costs. It's not going to be the $20,000 in sales you lost, unless they've got a special clause in there for that. So if we look at that, 99.9 against 99.99, you can see the difference. 8 hours a year against 52 minutes a year. So that, an extra 0.09% of uptime can add, if you've got a mission critical business, you'd rather it be a 52 minutes a year window than for 8 hours. So look at the uptimes, look at their compensation, read the fine print, find out what happens. Now, we're talking about hardware. Hardware, as you know, is going to fail, usually. And there's things like maintenance windows, somebody forgets to turn the air conditioning on and everything overheats. There's all sorts of things that can happen. So you've got to expect that. But look at the SLA, look at the companies and see what their track record is and look at all that. These are all the things you need to take into consideration when you're looking for a host. SSLs, everybody know about SSL? Now, back in the day, when I started doing websites, SSL was only really necessary if you had an e-com site, for example, because it was like, you're going to be doing transactions, with credit cards, you need an SSL. If you had a cat blog, SSL wasn't necessary. Now, because Google has now said that we're going to mark you down if you don't have an SSL, everybody wants an SSL. Traditionally, SSLs cost you about $100 a year. But Google wasn't a complete, arsehole about this. they did look into it and they said, well, if we're going to make everybody have an SSL, let's give them a free one. So has everybody heard about Let's Encrypt? So Let's Encrypt allows you to have a free SSL. Do you know the difference between the free Let's Encrypt SSL and the paid SSL? Exactly. It's kind of like if you got those mutt scones out there and there was another table where they were $2 a scone and this one's free. It's the exact same scone. It's just one's free and one's not. So having an SSL, so check your hosting companies. A lot of hosting companies will include Let's Encrypt, so they'll have a very easy system for you to set up SSLs, maybe a one-click system. Have a look for that, because that means you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole yourself and set it up. But it's very important, obviously because of Google's ranking, but also if you've got e-com sites, it's still a good idea to have SSL on it. Backups. Has everybody got a backup of their site? How often do you back up? That's the thing, so back in the days of static HTML and CSS, basically you took a copy of your site before you uploaded it and that was it, that was your backup, because it didn't change. But now with WordPress, every time you update WordPress, you should back up. If you've got a dynamic site, let's say you've got a membership site and you've got new people coming on every day and signing up to your site, you need to take a backup every day at least. In some cases, you might need to take a backup every time a change happens on your site. So having a backup of your site now is pretty much mandatory. And there's an old saying, we've probably all heard it 100 times, if you haven't tested your backup, you haven't got a backup. I've seen it so many times where people have had a problem and then gone to restore the backup and it's all gone terribly wrong because everybody's scared to test the backup. Because they go, what happens if it doesn't work? So test your backups. Check with your internet company. So a lot of internet hosting companies now will have backups as part of their services. So getting backups included with that is a real bonus. Because there are a lot of plugins, there's Updraft Plus and Backup Buddy that will do it for you, but having it set up with your hosting, it's just one step you don't have to worry about then. And be careful the ones that say that they do backups, but what they mean is they back up their servers, so if their server goes down, they can restore everything for themselves. I've had this in my past where they said, oh yeah, we back it all up. And then I had a problem with my site, and I said, oh, can I get a copy of that backup? They go, no, that's our copy. You have to do your own backups. So making sure that the backup is for you, not just for them. How constant it is too. So like I said, sometimes you might need to back up every day. Sometimes you might be once a month. Definitely back up before you do any updates. And how often do we update? Quite often these days. Make sure it's off-site too. You don't want to be backing up to your server. Because if the server goes down, so is your backup. And I've seen that happen in the past where people have been backing up to where their website is. Not a good idea. So you want it off-site, whether you dump it into an S3 bucket or dump it into a Dropbox or download it to your hard drive, whatever. Make sure it's away from where your actual website is. And how easy is it to restore? Check it out. Do it. Test it and make sure it does actually work. Staging environments. Now, when I first started, staging environments was the realm of big agencies and hardcore coders. But now it really needs to be, everybody needs to have a staging environment. The reason being is when we're doing updates, things can go wrong. So as you update your website, if things go wrong and you've got a live site, you can bring your site down and you've got people who can't get to your site. If you've just got a cat blog, that's not too much of a problem maybe, but if you've got an e-com site, membership site or any kind of business site, you don't want people coming to a site that's being broken because you updated. So using staging environments, a lot of hosts now will actually incorporate staging environments as part of their services, which means that you can make a copy of your live site, do your updates on the copy, make sure it works, and then you can either push up those changes straight to your live site or you can just replicate it on the live site, depending on how your site's set up. But it's a really good idea to do that. So you're not breaking the live one. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and that's, like back in the day you had to set up like a off-site server to do all this kind of stuff. Now it's becoming more normal for hosting providers to do this as part of their services. So have a look for the ones that do this, and they're the ones you want to kind of use, because it just means you've got that extra, even if it's not just for updates, you can do a complete rebuild of your site in a staging environment, and then when you're ready you can push it up. So there's a lot of benefits to having staging. So it kind of looks like that. Support. Yeah. So support is very important. And usually when things go wrong, that's when you find out how good your support is. So the things to look for support is 24/7, if possible. Find out what kind of support it is. So I've had hosting companies in the past that was like ticketing system. So how it worked is you went onto the website and something's gone wrong, so you put in a ticket. My website has gotten down. And then an hour later you get a reply. Okay, what's the problem? The website's not working. And this is happening, getting this error. Okay, an hour later you might get another reply. We're looking into it, we'll get back to you. That's a ticketing system. It's not really conducive to getting your site up quickly. So having chat, like live chat or phone support, is really mandatory if you want to get quick responses. And your time's precious. You know, you don't want to be waiting for an email, especially because generally when things go wrong, it's usually a Saturday afternoon or, you know, Friday night, times when, you know, you don't want to be spending all your time on waiting for the emails to come through. The other thing too is find out, I mean, most of us here are all WordPress people. There's a lot of WordPress specific hosts out there at the moment, and they're trained up to help you on WordPress problems. So traditional hosts only give support to the infrastructure. In other words, if your website goes down and you ring up the hosting company and you say the website's down, they go, well, actually our infrastructure is all working perfectly, it's a problem with your site. It's not their problem. If there's a problem with the website, if some problem with the code or something like that, that's not their problem. All they're worried about is if the server is actually up. So checking with a lot of the WordPress specific hosting you got out there nowadays, they'll actually incorporate the support to include your website. So the application as well as the infrastructure. So that means if your website goes down because of a problem, maybe you just pushed an update and it's throwing a big wobbly, they can look into it and they can help you rectify the problem, even though it's more of a code problem than an infrastructure problem. And make sure that the support's free as well. There's nothing worse than you've got a problem and then they tell you it's going to be $10 an hour to fix, or $10 a minute to fix your problem, or they charge you for it. And there are some hosting companies that apparently still do that. So free, it's much, you know, 24/7 if possible, and how quickly they respond. These are the important things. Budget's always a big thing. You always get what you pay for. But it's also important to know what you need. Like I said earlier, if your website is not revenue generating, if it's maybe just you know, you're putting on recipes or it's your personal blog, you know, you're not making any money out of it, you don't want to be spending $200 a month on hosting, because it's just not, unless you've got $200 a month that you can throw away, that's fine, but generally you don't want to be spending money on things that you don't need. On the other hand, if your website is revenue generating and that's one of your big sources of business, the last thing you want to be doing is spending $5 a month on hosting that's not up to scratch for something that your whole business relies on. It's kind of like if you've got a tradie come to your house and he's got a plastic tool set. You're not going to put a lot of confidence in him because, you know, generally tradies will spend the money on their tools to make sure they've got the best tools for the job. And the same with hosting. For some reason, I see it all the time, that people don't put the value on hosting that they need to. This is the main part of your business or your website. This is the part that's the performant part that helps your site stay alive and get out to the, you know, the entire internet. And people, I've seen it all the time, they'd be, you know, quibbling, like they're using a $5 host and then they're wondering why their site's slow and why it's not up and why it keeps going down. And, you know, they say, oh, I've lost, you know, $200,000 in sales this month because my website keeps going down. But they're spending $5 a month on hosting. You know, and they'll spend more than that on marketing. I've seen it where they're spending $5 a month on hosting and then they'll spend $200,000 on marketing to get people to the site, which then goes down because there's too many people on the site. So look at what your website needs. So like I said, if it's not revenue generating, if you don't care if it goes down for small amounts of time, if you don't need all the bells and whistles, pay for what you need. And beware of the all-you-can-eat. I used to see it a lot, was unlimited bandwidth, unlimited disk space. Has everybody watched Simpsons? Ever see that episode where Homer goes to the buffet? He says, but it says all you can eat. Yeah. If you read the fine print on those unlimited ones, it's fair use. There's always a limit to everything. So, and at some stage, especially if your website's generating revenue and you get a lot of people to it, that's when you're going to find out that it's not actually all you can eat, and that's when you really need it. So, in my time with WP Engine and learning about hosting, as apart from being a web designer, one of the interesting things was looking into shopping and membership websites. Now, when you log into the back of WordPress, one of the first things that happens is it becomes completely uncacheable. It basically turns your site into a completely dynamic site. And this is what happens a lot of times when you go into a membership site. You've got to log into the site, so it's now serving the site up dynamically, and the cacheable part of the site becomes very, very small. And same with shopping sites. So every time you put something in your shopping cart, it has to carry that to each page. So it just makes the site very heavy. And of course that puts a load on big load on your server. So if you've got any of those kind of sites, you really need to look at your hosting and make sure you've got something that's going to do a good job. Especially if if you're generating income from your site, this is where you really need to look into what it can do. So when I was looking around, one of the very interesting things that I found is people don't kind of think of the big picture. And what I noticed was I was looking at a lot of the stats from the servers, resource levels. And I kept seeing this big spike. Like you look at a 6-month chunk of server stats, and there was always constantly this big spike on one particular day. It was always the 14th of February. Now, what was happening on that day? Valentine's Day. And what happens on Valentine's Day? You get thousands upon thousands of men who have forgotten all about it and suddenly hit all the florists looking for flowers. So florist shops that normally get maybe 10 people to the site a week suddenly get 2,000 hits in an hour. And they fall over because they're on cheap hosting that's not designed to handle that amount of concurrency. So one of the things you've got to look at when you've got these kind of sites is, where are my seasonal traffic spikes coming from? Am I set up to handle that? Do I need to increase my hosting for these times? Betting sites around Melbourne Cup. We have a lot of large companies who run betting sites who will come to us a month before Melbourne Cup and upgrade everything because they know that on Melbourne Cup Day, everybody is going to, especially at that one time, like an hour before Melbourne Cup starts, everybody hits those online betting sites. So being able to handle that traffic is very important. So when I look at it, this is what normally happens. You build a site. When you build a site, it's brand new, there's nobody coming to the site. So imagine you've got a bar. You just built the bar, you open it up, you've got a few people rolling in. It's kind of like this, you've got a barmaid, you've got maybe 5 or 6 regular customers. They're coming in, buying, I just want a beer, pour a beer, it's all good. They sit down. You've been to one of those bars, nice and quiet. You can just walk up, just give me a beer, and they'd have a nice chat to you. Very easy. That's normally what happens when you build a site. It starts off very quiet, there's no traffic to it. It's very easy to serve the traffic. But then what happens? Imagine you've got this bar, and there's a big football game just finished, and the home team just won, and everybody's celebrating. And they all come to your bar because it's on the way to the train station. And all of a sudden, instead of having 5 people in the bar, you've now got 1,000 people in the bar, and they all want to drink. But they don't just want a beer, they want the fancy cocktail. And you've got to serve it up. And all you've got is this one barman. You know this guy? What's going to happen? Not much. And this is what happens with websites. We see it time and time again. People, when you start a site out, it's nice and quiet, nothing's happening. But what you're wanting is you want all those people to the bar. You want all those people to buy the fancy drinks. But what you don't plan for is when they actually get there, how many people have I got serving these people? If you had a physical shop, if you have a bar, you make sure you've got the staff to handle that traffic. But people don't think about it with their websites. So you get 504 errors. Has anybody seen them? Get there, 504 error? Yep, that's what happens when you've got too many people hitting that bar and no one served them. So making sure you've got the infrastructure ready for those moments. And these, if you know they're going to happen, a lot of people know they're going to happen. We get people come to us and it's like, we're going to go on Shark Tank. And we're expecting thousands of people to hit the site over a 1 hour period. And so we architect ready for that. But there's also, times when it's just going to happen. We've also seen where people get picked up. It's nice, quiet, it might be some mums created a blog about, maternity wear, and then somebody in the United States has picked it up and they're an influencer, and all of a sudden, instead of 1,000 people for the month, they've got, 1 million people in an hour. You can't predict for that, unfortunately, but, making sure you have as much resource behind you to start with is going to help. And making sure your hosting company is a good, reputable hosting company, and someone you can ring and say, hey, look, this is happening, can we fix it? Because you don't have a lot of time to react to this. So before we sort of finish up, a lot of people ask me, what do we need? What do I need for hosting? Like, just tell me what I need. And it's a very open-ended question. So if I was to ask you, which car is the quickest? A 1.6 litre or a 4.5 litre? Okay, who thinks the 1.6 litre is quicker? Who thinks the 4.5 litre motor is quicker? No one knows? You think it's a trick question, don't you? Okay, so normally you'd say a 4.5 litre would be quicker, wouldn't you? Bigger motor. What if the 1.6 litre was in a Formula 1 Ferrari and the 4.5 litre is in a SUV? Now which one's quicker? Good. Now let's put it another way. What if we're going on a race and it's a cross-country race? Now which one's quicker? So we get the question a lot. A lot of people look at hosting and they look at the specs up there. This is 8 cores and 200 gigs of memory and thousands of gigs of disk space. But what do you actually need? You actually need to know what you need. Do I need more memory? Do I need more CPU? Do I need more support? You need to know what you need for your website. Every website is a snowflake. So talking to your host and figuring out what you need is the first step. So in summary, making sure you've got a good SSL, free SSL, security and SEO. Back up regularly, every day if you can, and making sure you can, a lot of times those backups you can keep them for like 30 or 40 days, so you've got a record of them. Because if you get hacked 20 days ago, you need to go back 30. Use staging to minimise the impact on your live site. Get good support. Budget for what you need. Know what you need and pay for what you need. And anticipate and have resources to meet demand. So I think that pretty much sums it all up. Any questions?
Questions for Ricky?
If I'm monitoring resources like CPU, memory, disk bandwidth, and all that kind of stuff, can I tell which of those is going to impact the performance when it gets pegged?
Yeah, if you're monitoring it, what you can see is you can see what's actually taking up. I have seen it. It all depends on your site. So I've seen, for example, e-com sites where during their normal traffic, it seems to be running fine, and then they'll put out an EDM like a marketing campaign, and the traffic changes. So your normal traffic is like they're coming on and doing X, Y, Z. Then they put out an EDM or a marketing campaign which might say, all these products are 20% off. So the actual, and for like an hour. So the actual way that people are hitting the site is completely different. And the way the resources are being used are different. But if you're monitoring that over time, you'll see the patterns. But you can definitely see, you can use things like New Relic to really delve in and see where on a code level what's happening. And at some point you can see the CPU and a bit of the resource usage. Depending on your host and what they kind of allow you to see, but generally what we find is the CPU usage is the main culprit, especially when you've got a lot of concurrency hitting the site. But it all depends on, like I said, every site's a snowflake, but monitoring over time, and that's one of the things I really stress to people is get some stats and monitor it over time. And so using things like Google Analytics to see when the traffic's hitting your site, and you see patterns or when maybe spikes come in. I've seen the sites that I built back in the day that you could see a very distinct, for example, a hairdresser's, supplying to hairdressers wholesaler. There was a very distinct rise to the middle of the week, and then it slumped down. By Sunday, you had nobody on the site because they were all, with a hangover on Sunday morning, and nobody was shopping. But during the week, they were coming back and shopping. You can see those definite spikes. But looking then to see how that affects the resources, and then you can start planning out where you need more resources, what you need to do with the site.
Any other questions? People eager to get off to lunch. Okay, well, thanks again, Ricky. I'm sure you'll be around all day if you want to ask Ricky some more questions about hosting. We've also got the Kinetics guys here as the sponsors, so if you've got some questions about hosting, you can always ask them as well. But yeah, give a big round of applause for Ricky. Thanks.
Thank you.